Loras Tyrell stood upon the highest balcony of the high tower, gazing out over the city of Old Town as dusk settled across the horizon. A hush had fallen over the city. No carillons chimed and no bells tolled from the massive structure that dwarfed the slender towers of its neighbors. The black waters of the whispering sound shimmered under the dying light, and the air, tinged with the sense of salt and distant blooms, carried the tension of the day. Cloaked in a cloak of green velvet embroidered with golden roses, Loras appeared a somber, princely silhouette against the fading sun. A hush had filled him too. Gone was the impulsive youth of tournaments and perfumed leisures. What remained was a man tempered by the furnace of war, heartbreak, and unyielding duty. He wore no crown at that moment, nor had he yet claimed one, but the idea turned like a whetstone in his mind. House Tyrell, once the proud warden of the South, had been thrown into chaos. The tapestry of alliances that bound the reach to the Iron Throne had frayed with the passing storms. The Lannisters demanded fealty. The Targaryens, if any scion remained, would doubtless try to wrest power back, and lesser houses circled like vultures, each sensing an opportunity to carve a portion of the reach for themselves. King's Landing's attention had waned, for the North and East simmered with their own conflicts. But in that neglect Loras sensed a perilous freedom. To disclaim any allegiance and claim the reach for himself seemed madness, a flicker of ambition that threatened to consume him. Yet it was also the only path he believed might preserve the land he loved and the people who looked to Highgarden as a beacon. The night before, he had received word from Tarly men. The lords of Horn Hill, the high towers of Old Town, the Redwines of the Arbor, and the Florence of Brightwater keep all waited to see which way the winds would blow. Some had already threatened to withhold their harvests from Highgarden if Loras continued to stall in openly declaring for the Iron Throne's newest occupant, whoever that might be. Others demanded that Mace Tyrell's heir affirm the fealty that had bound their ancestors for centuries, or else they would no longer supply soldiers when the next enemy marched upon the south. Loras had spent sleepless nights thinking that if he bent the knee to any single claimant, the Reach would become a battleground once more. If he tried to remain neutral, the war would come anyway. But if he placed himself upon the throne of the Reach and declared the green and gold as the colors of a new sovereignty, then perhaps he could unite them by forging an identity stronger than fear or old duty. The Tyrell Rose had always sought sunlight, and Loras Tyrell would attempt to seize it. He turned away from the balcony, his heart pounding with the gravity of what he was about to do. Ser Rabar Royce, a knight who had once fought him in a tourney many years before, stood at the entrance to the balcony. A serious man, newly sworn to House Tyrell to escape the turmoil in the Vale, Rabar inclined his head in silent respect. "You summoned me, my lord," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the high vault of the tower chamber. Loras nodded. "Rabar, gather the Tyrell knights. Gather them quietly and bring them here, to the base of the Hightower courtyard. No banners, no fanfare. If Lord Hightower's guard should ask our purpose, tell them only that it is the will of Highgarden to speak with them all." Ser Rabar shifted uncomfortably. "I will do as you command, my lord. Might I ask what your intentions are?" A faint smile quirked Loras's lips. "You have always been honorable, Ser Rabar. In another life we might have been dear friends, but now we are forced into roles neither of us expected. You shall know soon enough. See to your duty." When Rabar had departed, Loras remained for a moment longer, letting the breeze tug at his hair. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of lavender and orange, reminding him of Marjorie. She had always laughed at how much time he spent on appearances, at the vanity that once accompanied his every breath. But her gentle teasing felt a lifetime away. He wondered if she would recognize him now, scarred in both body and spirit. Perhaps she would. Perhaps she would be proud. The memory warmed him as he left the balcony and made his way down spiral staircases to the grand hall within the high tower. The city was on edge. Loras had felt it from the moment he arrived. The lords were uneasy. Rumors of new Targaryen pretenders had surfaced in Essos. The North had begun stirring under whatever lord or lady had come to power once the last war ended. The Iron Islands threatened raids along the coast, as they always did, for a kingdom fractured by internal strife was easy plunder. And who now truly ruled in King's Landing? Some said a Lannister cousin sat the throne, others that the Baratheons had found new strength, others still that the realm was governed by a patchwork council of opportunistic lords. None had truly stepped forward to unify Westeros, or had the spine to do so. In this confusion and rot, Loras believed the Reach must become something more than just wards of a fading Iron Throne. He reached the main hall. The banners in Old Town now bore the Hightower flame as always, though Loras noted that the Golden Rose standard was displayed, if a bit overshadowed by the might of Lord Leighton's ancient seat. Lord Leighton Hightower himself was an old man, rumored to dabble in arcane arts. He had retreated to his upper chambers weeks ago. Rumor had it he consulted tomes of prophecy, leaving the day-to-day ruling of Old Town in the hands of his children. One of them, Ser Baelor Hightower, had become the face of the city's leadership. As Loras crossed the hall, Baelor Hightower stepped from the shadows, tall, gray-eyed, clad in a tabard of white and gold. He inclined his head. "Ser Loras, you have the look of a man who's made a grave decision. Am I to expect blood spilled tonight?" Loras did not startle at his appearance, for he had half expected someone to confront him. "I hope not," he said honestly. "I have no quarrel with the Hightowers, Baelor. I hold your house in the highest esteem. This city is the cradle of knowledge in the Reach and perhaps in all Westeros. For that, it must remain strong." "Then we are in agreement," Baelor replied, though his posture was tense. He glanced at the retinue behind Loras. Only a handful of knights, all in Tyrell green and gold. "And yet, you do not explain the gathering of your men below." Loras watched him carefully. "I do not plan to hide my intentions from you. I intend to speak to the assembled knights of the Reach this evening. I mean to crown myself king of the Reach. Tomorrow or the day after we shall see, but soon." Baelor Hightower's eyes widened, though he did not step back. "A folly or ambition incarnate," he murmured, struggling to keep his voice even. "King of the Reach, do you claim the old Gardner line? My ancestors served them, and that blood runs through House Tyrell. Not pure Gardner blood, but close enough that by tradition, some might accept my claim," Loras answered. "My cause is not for personal glory. The wars have left our people shattered, our knights restless, our banners uncertain which cause to follow. We have lost enough to external claimants. The Tyrells stand at the center of the region, so let us unite the region. I believe the time is right for the Reach to stand alone under a single banner." Baelor's gaze flickered across Loras's face, searching for doubt or madness. Finding neither, he seemed at a loss for words. "You would break centuries of oath and tradition." "Indeed," said Loras, though his tone was not without sorrow. "Yet the stability of the Reach may well depend on it. Bend the knee to King's Landing, and we will be drawn into the next war of succession. Let them come to me. Let them try to claim us. We shall see if they can breach our fields, starve our people, or break our lines. If we stand as one, we can feed ourselves, defend ourselves, and no longer send our men to die for the ambitions of others." Baelor studied him, nodding slowly. "You will need the support of my house. The Hightowers have always been second only to the Tyrells in the Reach. If you force us against you, it may mean bloodshed. If you find a way to keep us as friends—" He trailed off, his voice laced with meaning. Loras's heart beat heavily. "Your father has always been honorable," he said, "though I have not always understood him. And you, Baelor, I believe you want what's best for Old Town. I make you this vow. Your family shall retain dominion over Old Town, with all the rights and privileges you have enjoyed for centuries, if you join me. Should I fail, the consequences to my house will be dire. But for your part, if my claim is recognized, the Hightowers will remain the second greatest power in the Reach. They may find that position even stronger than before." Baelor, with an odd glint in his eye, inclined his head. "You speak like a king already, Loras Tyrell. Very well. I will not stand in your way. Old Town must remain free of conflict. If you can guarantee that, at least for this night, then you have my neutrality at minimum." But do not expect me to muster men for you until you have proven that you can hold the loyalty of the other great houses." "That is more than I hoped," Loras said, "and enough for now." He left Baylor Hightower in the dim corridor, the echoes of their footsteps fading. Loras's own chest felt heavy with relief. It was an early sign of success to avert a conflict before it could blossom. If the Hightowers had decided to resist him, things might have turned bloody even before he had properly declared his claim. Now, though, he had at least a sliver of a chance to speak to the lords and knights without the stench of blood lingering in the air. Outside in the courtyard, the torches fluttered in the breeze, illuminating the moat that encircled the high tower. Dozens of Tyrell men-at-arms had quietly gathered in the courtyard, answering the summons from Rabar Royce. Their faces reflected torches and moonlight, uncertain but steady. Loras recognized many. Sir John Fossaway, the Knight of Apple Vale, had come at his call. Sir Colin Beesbury, too. They had fought side by side in a recent skirmish against brigands on the Manders banks. He saw no sign of the Tarley banners, which made sense. Randall Tarley had always been fiercely proud, and if anyone would present immediate trouble, it was the Tarleys. Horn Hill possessed a strong fighting tradition, and it chafed at living under Tyrell rule. But Loras welcomed the challenge. Better to have them out in the open. Loras stepped forward. The men parted for him, revealing a wide circle of expectant eyes. A hush settled. He inhaled the crisp night air. This was a turning point, and he felt the memory of his father, Mace Tyrell, upon him. Mace, for all his boasting and feasts, had known how to display grandeur, how to project a confidence that men found reassuring. Loras would summon that same gift tonight. "My friends," he began, voice carrying into the stillness. "Knights and loyal men of the Reach, you know my name, Loras Tyrell of Highgarden. You have served my father before me, and we have bled together in battle for the good of this realm. We have lost friends, we have lost liege lords, we have lost our sense of security. The world beyond the Mander is in chaos, and those who would call themselves kings or queens sit upon unstable thrones. Our loyalty has too often been exploited for other men's ambitions." He paused, scanning their faces. He saw glints of steel in their expressions, not anger yet, but frustration, a longing for stability. Loras pressed onward. "I say now, enough. The Reach is Westeros's breadbasket, its orchard, its rose garden. We feed the realm. We supply both men and grain to anyone who calls himself or herself the rightful ruler. And what have we received in return? Endless wars, crippling taxes, and forced alliances that lead our children to slaughter." A murmuring began among the knights, some quietly nodding, others looking unsettled. Loras raised his voice, driving the point like a lance. "It ends tonight. No longer shall the men of the Reach march northward for the ambitions of houses that care not whether our crops fail or our fields burn. No longer shall we kneel to thrones that fail to protect us from raiders, from chaos, from internal squabbling that costs us so dearly. I have come to believe that the Reach must stand alone, that it must protect itself. And so I intend to crown myself king of the Reach, if the houses of the Reach will have me. I do not ask for blind loyalty, but for unity. If we stand as one, no other region can break us. There is no need to fear for your harvests or your families." The courtyard erupted in hushed conversation. They had expected words, but perhaps not these. Loras did not falter. The Tyrell line once served the gardeners, the kings of old. When the last king Mern died upon the field of fire, my ancestors became wardens of the south under Aegon the Conqueror. For nearly 3 centuries we have served the Iron Throne, once Targaryen, then Baratheon, then Lannister, then 1,000 disputes and claimants. But if the Targaryens return, they will demand we bend the knee once more. If the Lannisters hold the throne, they will demand we fight for them yet again. Whichever face sits upon the Iron Throne, we know the result. The Reach shall be taxed, threatened, taken for granted. I will not watch our homeland be bled any longer." Some knights took a knee at once, though uncertainly. Sir John Fossaway, holding an apple-painted shield, knelt but with a conflicted gaze. Ser Colin Beesbury soon followed, with his fists clenched around the hilt of his sword. Another, bold in the swirling torchlight, stood and spoke. Ser Loras, I have fought with you and bled for you, but your claim flies in the face of centuries. The Tyrells are not kings by right. Could you not negotiate better terms with King's Landing, or choose a more moderate approach? This defiance will bring war to the Reach again, and you know it. Loras turned to face the voice. It belonged to Ser Raymond Mullendore, an older knight. He had a hawk-like nose and a mane of gray hair. His question rang with fear and doubt. I have tried, Loras answered, to find any solution other than open defiance. Our envoys to King's Landing found only confusion. A pretender sits the throne, or perhaps no one does at all. The lords of the north are rumored to be isolating themselves. The Stormlands do not know if a Baratheon or a Lannister claims them. We can wait for the realm to sort itself out, but time will bring the next war to our borders. If we do not prepare now, if we do not claim our destiny, we shall be the realm's battlefield once more. Let them come, if they wish, but let them come against a united kingdom. More men knelt, some out of conviction, others reluctantly. A clamor of voices rose, some in support, some in doubt. Loras let them speak, for he knew the moment demanded honesty. He had no illusions that he could simply declare himself king without question. The knights before him represented only a fraction of the Reach's martial power, but this was the first step in a larger journey. If these knights accepted him, word would spread. Some houses would undoubtedly rebel, and Loras would be forced to quell them or compromise. But the seeds of a new monarchy must be planted in the hearts of such men. The night was thick with tension as Loras continued. If you stand with me, you stand for the freedom of the Reach. I do not seek to become a conqueror of other lands, nor do I desire to plunder other regions. I seek only for us to defend our own. Will you join me? In the hush that followed, Ser Rabar Royce came forward. He had seen many sides of the realm, though as a newcomer to the Reach, he brought a perspective not mired in old loyalties. With measured words, Rabar said, I have sworn an oath to Ser Loras Tyrell. In my time, I have witnessed how divided the realm is, how the center has collapsed. If one region can find unity and strength in these dark times, let it be so. I, for one, will raise my sword for Loras Tyrell, whether he bears a rose sigil or a crown. That sealed it for many onlookers. A slow wave of kneeling men spread through the courtyard. Loras felt the weight of the moment, a mixture of triumph and fear in equal measure. He knew the hardest tasks lay ahead, swaying the powerful lords, forging alliances with Tarly, Redwine, Florent, Hightower, and Tarth if need be. But tonight was the birth of something, or perhaps its conception. When every man had knelt or bowed in some fashion, Loras thanked them and told them to await further instructions. They dispersed quietly, hearts pounding with what they had witnessed, tongues burning to whisper the news in every tavern and alley. As Loras stepped away, Rabar Royce pulled him aside with the courtesy of a friend. If I may speak plainly, my lord? Always, said Loras, letting out a tense breath. Your sister Marjorie was once queen. The Tyrells have always woven themselves into power through marriages. Some might say the simpler path is to wed you to one of the claimants, or to arrange a match that grants you near-royal status. Are you certain you would not prefer that route? Loras considered it, drawing in a slow breath. We have no assurance that any of the current claimants has the strength to unify the realm. Too many times have we placed ourselves as the pillar that props up a weak throne. Enough. The easy path is no longer easy. It is a path of indefinite warfare. There is too much at stake for half measures. Rabar accepted the answer with a solemn nod. Then I stand with you. They parted, and Loras found himself alone beneath the flickering torchlight, a swirl of moths dancing in the halo of flames. The magnitude of his decision nearly overwhelmed him, but he kept walking. Tonight, he would rest in Old Town as a would-be king in all but name. Tomorrow, the roads must be cleared for his journey back to Highgarden, where he would give shape to the ceremony that would defy centuries. His mind churned with each step, the enormity of it all pressing upon him, yet a sense of clarity braced his spine. He had come too far to turn back, and in truth he felt no desire to do so. The dawn rose over Old Town in pale gold and lavender, painting the white walls of the high tower with the first beams of a new day. Loras did not linger. He and his knights set forth early, crossing the broad honey-colored stone bridge that led from the high tower to the city proper. Their horses' hooves clattered on the cobbles, echoing through the winding streets. Fishermen hauling nets and sleepy bakers rubbing flour from their hands paused to watch the knights ride by, curious and wary. Rumors likely traveled faster than Loras could. By midday, half the city would know that Ser Loras Tyrell intended to claim the mantle of kingship. Some would scoff, some would cheer, some would tremble. But the gossip was unstoppable as the Mander's flow. Loras led the company southward along the main road that paralleled the whispering sound. They would follow it until it veered east towards High Garden, crossing farmland and gentle hills that made the heart of the reach so fertile. Having left Baylor Hightower with a promise of no immediate hostilities, Loras felt certain that no Old Town men-at-arms would harass them. But he remained vigilant. At midday, they broke for a light meal beside a clear stream. Loras dismounted, patting the neck of his stallion. Rabar Royce helped him remove the saddle so the horse might graze more comfortably. A small orchard of apple trees grew by the stream, their scent reminding Loras of carefree childhood days at High Garden. He almost smiled at the memories, prancing about the gardens with Garland, Willis, and Garland, each of them so different yet bound by name and tradition. Yet those days of innocence were past. He turned to find a group of knights forming around him. Ser John Fossaway approached, removing his helm and letting the breeze ruffle sweat-matted hair. "My lord," he said quietly, "we have pledged ourselves to your cause, but some of the men wish to know the plan more concretely. Where do we go from here? What if the Tarleys move against us? What if the lords of the Reach reject your call?" Loras weighed his words carefully. "We go first to High Garden, our seat. It is there that I will formally announce myself. Any lords who doubt my intentions or want to challenge them may do so on our own ground. High Garden is strong, ringed by fertile fields, the Mander at its back. I can host them and show them I come not to unleash war on my own domain, but to fortify it." "And Tarley?" pressed Ser John. "Tarley will be our greatest challenge," Loras admitted. "Randall Tarley despises weakness, but he also despises change that threatens his house's autonomy. If he thinks he can better his standing by resisting me, he might do so. He wields a formidable force, disciplined and feared. I must treat with him directly in some manner. I shall offer him an exalted place in the new order. If that fails, well, we must be prepared to crush any open defiance before it spreads." He saw the men exchange uneasy glances. Loras's words were heavy with the possibility of bloodshed. But none stepped back, for they had already chosen their side. The journey continued. As the hours passed and the sunlight shifted, Loras pondered how the other houses would react. The Redwines, perched on the arbor, possessed the greatest fleet in the Reach. They might see independence as an opportunity to reap trade benefits, free of King's Landing tariffs. The Florents, always proud of their distant Targaryen connections, might hope a Targaryen restoration would elevate them, but those illusions had grown thin. The Oakhearts of Old Oak, the Rowans of Golden Grove, the Beesburys of Honeyholt, the Mullendors of Uplands, the Costains of Three Towers, so many houses, each with unique histories and ambitions. Loras's claim might unite them or fracture them deeper than ever. He needed a demonstration of authority they could not ignore. They crossed the rolling countryside of the Reach, passing miles of farmland bursting with wheat, barley, and vegetables that seemed to glow in the summer sun. Shepherds tended flocks on green hillsides, laborers tended vines that produced sweet wines, and the roads thrummed with wagons shipping produce toward Old Town. The land looked bountiful, not a hint of the devastation so often found in the Riverlands or other war-torn areas. Yet beneath that serenity lurked a gnawing anxiety. Many small folk were frightened by rumors of renewed conflict. Loras heard them whisper as he passed, He is the Knight of Flowers. That's the Lord from Highgarden. Come to do what, though? Is there a new war? Their questions were left unanswered, for Loras could not stop to reassure every fearful heart, though part of him yearned to. At dusk of the third day, Highgarden's tall, graceful spires came into view, a vision of pale stone rising amid the wide glimmer of the Mander. Even in the fading light, the gardens surrounding the castle sparkled with bright blossoms, a testament to the region's fertility and the Tyrell's pride in beauty. Rows of apple trees lined the approach, rose bushes climbed the walls, and the ramparts shimmered with golden banners. This was his family's seat. For as long as Loras could remember, the sense of home and heritage had been woven into every corner of this castle. Now it was the place from which he would defy the rest of Westeros. By the time they arrived at the gates, night had fallen, but the portcullis was raised upon recognition. The men-at-arms of Highgarden, sporting the Tyrell rose upon their uniforms, rushed forward to greet their returning liege. The steward, an aging man named Caswell, limped forward to kneel. "My lord, you have returned at last. We have heard rumors." He avoided meeting Loras's eye, as if afraid to speak aloud what he knew. Loras dismounted. Rabar and others followed suit. "Rumors," Loras said, "that I will claim a crown. They are true." He waited, gauging the reaction of the men around him. Some let out murmurs of surprise, though the steward Caswell merely closed his eyes for a moment as if making peace with the notion. Caswell rose. "Your father once commanded me to watch for your well-being. He is gone, but my loyalty remains. If this is your path, Highgarden will stand with you, my lord." Relief washed through Loras. He had not fully doubted his own seat, but in times of turmoil, even loyalty could be uncertain. If Highgarden resisted him, he could hardly claim to be king of anything. Now, at least the castle itself was firmly in hand. He instructed Caswell to have rooms prepared for the knights, food readied for feasts, and stables for the horses. Within the hour, the newcomers had settled. Servants rushed to serve them bread, cheese, fruits, and wine, and Loras retreated to the solar that had once been his father's. The solar was large, with high windows overlooking the Mander's Bend and the moonlit fields beyond. The air smelled of roses from the garden below, a sweet perfume that mingled oddly with the tension coiling in Loras's stomach. Tapestries depicting old Tyrell victories, embroidered hunts, banquets, and tourneys covered the walls. A single seat of carved oak and gilded vines dominated the center, where his father had once held court. Loras took his place there now, letting the memories wash over him. He remembered standing to the side during Mace Tyrell's endless speeches. He remembered the pomp and circumstance with which his father had welcomed guests. So many roads had led him here. His youthful dreams of chivalry, the tragedies of war, the heartbreak over Renly Baratheon's death, the countless shifts of alliances that had turned the realm into a graveyard of illusions. Now he had no illusions left, just a cause he believed in and the will to see it done. Ser Jon Fossaway entered, bowed, and said, "My lord, the men are fed and quartered. Some await your instruction, others have retired for the night. Did you wish to speak to them further?" Loras shook his head. "Let them rest. Tomorrow we begin the work of summoning the bannermen. Draft the Raven letters to be sent at first light. I want them to gather here within a fortnight, if they can." Jon Fossaway nodded, though his expression bore traces of anxiety. "And if they refuse the summons? Or if they come bristling with arms, ready to strike you down for treason?" Loras met his gaze. "We will greet them with courtesy. Let them see we do not intend to bully them. But be watchful. If any attempt violence, we must respond decisively. The throne of the Reach, should it come to fruition, cannot be won by meekness." Fossaway dipped his head in acknowledgement and left. Loras sat alone in the solar, letting the hush of Highgarden's corridors envelop him. He felt a pang as he thought of Marjorie's absence. He could almost imagine her here, alight with curiosity and cunning, offering counsel on how to ensnare powerful lords with the right words and feasts. He remembered her gentle admonitions. "Brother, Do not let your heart outrun your head. She had been the better politician. He wondered if she would approve of this bold ambition, or if she would have cautioned him to find a more subtle path. But Marjorie was not here. He had no illusions that she might come riding up the mander, ready to meddle in the affairs of men. She was presumably far away, perhaps in King's Landing, or perhaps fleeing from one more round of accusations of treason or duplicity. Her fate was uncertain, lost in the swirl of the realm's conflicts. Alone, with a candle's light flickering in the stillness, Loras withdrew a small sigil ring from the pouch at his belt. It bore the rose of House Tyrell, a symbol he had once worn proudly during his days as a shining tourney knight. He turned it over in his fingers. So much blood had been shed for that rose. He whispered, so quietly none could hear, "I will not fail you, father, nor you, Marjorie, nor Willis, nor Garland." Then, exhausted, he allowed himself to drift into restless sleep. Morning dawned crisp and bright, the summer sun promising a warm day. Loras woke early, the tension in his muscles reminding him that this was no idle dream. He rose, breaking his fast on honey-drizzled bread and boiled eggs. Then he set about drafting the letters with John Fossaway. The first raven would be sent to Randall Tarley at Horn Hill. That was the letter that weighed most on Loras's mind. He needed to word it carefully, neither too pleading nor too commanding. Tarley respected strength. Too conciliatory a tone would look like weakness. Too forceful a tone would provoke immediate rebellion. He settled on measured words. An invitation to Highgarden to discuss the future of the Reach, a statement of intent to unify their homeland under a single banner, and an offer to strengthen Horn Hill's position in a new era. He withheld mention of crowning himself king for the second paragraph, letting Tarley first digest the idea of a united southern realm. Then, with quiet determination, Loras penned the lines. "I mean to ascend the throne of the Reach, reviving the spirit of the Gardner kings, tempered by the wisdom we have gleaned through centuries of service. I pray you do not see this as rebellion, but as the necessary step to secure our region's safety. In this new order, House Tarley shall not be diminished, but elevated." He stared at the words when he was done, uncertain if Tarley's response would be an army at Highgarden's gates. But Loras had no choice. The die was cast. Similar letters were penned to the Redwines, the Hightowers, though Baylor already knew, the Rowans, the Oakharts, the Florence, and all other major houses. Then they were dispatched with ravens bearing the Tyrell seal. By midday, the letters were en route, scattering in different directions, carrying the seeds of Loras's ambition to every corner of the Reach. The waiting began. In the days that followed, Loras tried not to let anxiety consume him. He walked the gardens, oversaw the training of his knights, and prepared for a ceremonial crowning if enough lords arrived in agreement. He also began forging alliances with knights or lesser lords who were already within Highgarden's walls or near enough to be convinced. He conferred with Maester Harold, who scratched his beard and worried about the ramifications of splitting from the Iron Throne. He listened patiently to stewards and reeves who discussed harvest projections, distribution, and trade. If he was to rule, he needed to understand how to feed the people and keep them prosperous. On the fifth day, the first visitors arrived. They were lesser bannermen, House Beesbury's envoy, House Caswell of Bitterbridge, House Huey of Sunhouse. They came with small escorts, uncertain but curious. Loras received them in Highgarden's Great Hall, where he had replaced Mace Tyrell's seat with a newly crafted throne. It was carved from pale weirwood, acquired at some expense, inlaid with gold filigree shaped like curling rose vines. It was not yet his by right, but the sight of it made visitors pause, for it held a regal presence. Lord Beesbury, a stout man wearing a honeycomb sigil, approached with caution. "Sir Loras, my Lord Tyrell," he said, stumbling over the old form of address. "We have come to see if the rumors are true." "They are," said Loras, standing before the new throne. "I intend to claim the crown of the Reach. Do you come to bend the knee, or to question my resolve?" Lord Beesbury glanced at his companions. "We come to discuss terms, my lord. We do not come to declare ourselves in open rebellion. If what you say is true, that a united Reach will stand stronger, then perhaps we can support you. But how shall we fare if the Iron Throne decides to retaliate? We have no great thirst for war in our lands. Loras gestured for them to seat themselves around the hall's wooden tables, where fruit and wine had been laid. If war comes, we must unite to repel it. But ask yourselves, does the Iron Throne truly have the strength to subdue the entire Reach if we stand together? They can ill afford another war when their hold on the realm is so tenuous. And if any Targaryen returns, they must first tame King's Landing, the Stormlands, the Vale, the North, lands in turmoil. The Reach can remain strong and whole, its farms untrodden by foreign hosts. A few of the lords looked at one another. Lord Caswell, a thin man with an earnest face, ventured. My father always said that if Highgarden leads, the smaller houses will follow. But we must not lead our people into ruin. Will you truly see us stand alone against any threat? If a threat should come, Loras said gently, we will not face it alone. The might of the entire Reach will be at our backs. Think of the wine from the Arbor, the ships that can defend our coasts. Think of the knights from Horn Hill and Old Oak, the troops from the Hightowers, the resources from the Rowan lands. When we unify, we become the strongest region in Westeros. The threat of that alone may deter our enemies. Conversation continued into the evening. Loras sensed that these lesser lords were open to persuasion, especially if they believed the major players might soon bend. The fear of being left behind in a new order was a powerful motivator. By the end of their discussions, though none swore immediate fealty, they departed Highgarden leaning toward acceptance. One step forward. On the 7th day, a single raven arrived from Tarly. The letter was terse. Lord Randall Tarly demanded to meet Loras personally in Horn Hill to discuss this foolish notion. The tone was ominous. Ser Rabar Royce advised caution, for it could be a trap. Loras, however, insisted on going. If I do not meet him on his ground, he will view me as a coward. I must show that I have strength enough to face him on his own doorstep. We will take a strong escort, but not an army. They set out the next morning, a group of 40 knights and men-at-arms, including Ser Rabar, Ser John Fossaway, and a few others whose loyalty was solid. The journey to Horn Hill, east and slightly south of Highgarden, took 2 days through gentle rolling hills. Randall Tarly's reputation preceded him. A stern disciplinarian, a ruthless soldier, and a man who did not mince words. Horn Hill rose before them in the midday sun. Thick walls crowned a rocky height overlooking a wide valley, a position chosen for defense. In the fields nearby, Loras saw squads of Tarly soldiers training, Randall's famed discipline on display. The men moved in tight formations, their movements sharp and precise. This was no ragtag levy. Tarly had forged them into an elite force, some said the best in the Reach. The gates opened to admit Loras and his escort. They rode into the courtyard, mindful of the watchful eyes of Tarly archers along the battlements. Randall Tarly emerged soon after from within the keep, flanked by his own knights. He was a tall man with a weathered, grim face and a bald head, his mouth set in a permanent scowl. Ser Loras, he said curtly, you have nerve to come here, proclaiming yourself a king. I come in peace, Loras replied, dismounting, and in good faith. I have no wish to make enemies of House Tarly. You are vital to the defense of the Reach. Defense from whom? Randall demanded, eyes narrowing. The Tyrells have always been weak-willed pretenders to leadership, better at hosting feasts than winning wars. You think to set yourself up as a king, but you will only provoke the realm's wrath. We have sworn oaths, boy. Loras felt his temper flare, but he contained it. We swore oaths to protect the Reach, he said. Oaths to the Iron Throne came afterward and were based on the premise that the throne would protect us in return. That protection has long since eroded. The realm is fragmented, Tarly. Do you truly want to march into another war for some distant overlord's crown? Randall bristled. And you think the solution is to invite war upon our own soil by declaring independence? The Lannisters will not tolerate losing their breadbasket without a fight. nor will any Targaryen pretender with designs on reuniting Westeros. Let them come, Loras said coolly. We have the land, the men, and the harvest. The mountains of the Westerlands can't feed them for a long siege. If a Targaryen with dragons arrives, that is another matter, but we've heard no true sign that such dragons exist in large numbers. Only rumors and a few scaly beasts that might be no bigger than hounds. Randall crossed his arms. You are playing a dangerous game, Tyrell, but I admire nerve. Come inside, then, and we shall speak further. They entered the great hall of Horn Hill, a more austere place than the opulence of Highgarden. The banners of House Tarly, green huntsmen on brown fields, hung from the walls. Tarly's men stood at attention. They did not trust Loras or his escort enough to relax. Loras noticed a slight tension in the air, a readiness for violence if one wrong word was spoken. Over a sparse meal of roast venison and ale, they spoke in hushed, controlled tones. Randall Tarly challenged Loras on every point. How would the fields be defended? Who would supply arms and armor? How would the chain of command be structured if the Tyrells were no longer the wardens of the South but self-proclaimed sovereigns? Loras responded as firmly as he could, explaining how the Reach would rely on its local structure of lords, each controlling their lands but pledging men and resources to the newly established monarchy. The Tyrells would ensure fair distribution of grain and resources. Loras outlined his hopes that trade with Dorne might be reestablished, or even strengthened, if the Martells saw benefit in dealing with an independent kingdom next door. The Stormlands were too preoccupied with their own succession troubles. Possibly there would be minimal pressure from that direction. At last, Tarly set down his ale. His expression did not soften, but there was a flicker of reluctant respect in his eyes. You have given this thought, I see, and you speak of forging alliances, not bowing to any pretender. I do not share your optimism that we can remain at peace, but perhaps you are correct that we must be prepared to defend ourselves on our own terms. He paused, his voice taking on a bitter edge. I marched under your father's banners. I watched the realm tear itself apart for feeble kings. I have seen enough. If the Reach is to be free, so be it, but I will not be subservient to a weak king who expects me to do his fighting for him. Loras leaned forward. I do not ask you to be subservient. I ask you to stand beside me as a pillar of this new order. Horn Hill can be the sword arm of the Reach if you will it. If you pledge your men to me, I will see that your house's standing and renown are recognized. You shall be warden of the southern marches, or master of war, whatever title best acknowledges your martial skill. Tarly regarded him for a long moment. The tension in the hall was palpable. At last, Randall inclined his head, ever so slightly. I will consider your offer. Return to Highgarden, and I will come in a fortnight's time for your so-called crowning. If I deem your plans worthy, perhaps Horn Hill will kneel. It was not a pledge, but it was not outright refusal. Loras accepted it, understanding that Tarly was a proud man who needed to come to his own conclusion. You have my gratitude, Loras said, though he refrained from sounding too meek. That night, Loras and his knights accepted Tarly's reluctant hospitality. They slept lightly, half expecting a midnight ambush, but it never came. By morning's light, they departed Horn Hill with guarded optimism. As they rode away, Loras couldn't help but feel that if he could sway Tarly, many others would fall in line, out of fear or respect for Tarly's military might. The days leading up to Loras's planned coronation were fraught with preparation and uncertainty. Highgarden began to bustle with activity, as servants readied the halls for the arrival of numerous lords. Great banners were unfurled, depicting the golden rose upon a green field, hung from parapets and across tapestries. Musicians tuned their instruments. Cooks labored in the kitchens to create feasts that would dazzle and impress. Even the famed gardens of Highgarden were pruned and manicured to perfection. Loras recalled the old Tyrell motto, "Growing strong." It felt more apt than ever, yet twisted into a new shape, growing strong enough to stand apart from the rest of Westeros. One by one, the lords began to arrive. First came some of the lesser houses: House Huey, House Florent, House Caswell, House Beesbury. Then the Rowans of Golden Grove, the oak hearts of Old Oak, and the allied knights who served them. House Hightower sent a delegation. Baylor Hightower arrived with a modest escort, stating that Lord Leighton remained ensconced in his tower. The Redwynes of the Arbor arrived in a small fleet on the Mander, docking in Highgarden's port with casks of wine and a flurry of sails. It was a sight to behold, reminding Loras how crucial their naval power could be. Tension soared when Horn Hill's banners finally appeared on the horizon. Randall Tarley came at the head of 200 mounted men, all clad in disciplined columns. They marched into Highgarden's courtyard with quiet efficiency, and every onlooker felt the latent power in their movements. If Tarley wanted to start a war that day, he very well could have, but no swords were drawn. Tarley dismounted, greeted Loras with a curt nod, and made no move to unsheath his blade. A flicker of relief passed through Loras's heart. The next day was set for the crowning. Loras had no illusions that every man present was wholly devoted to him. Many watched with calculating eyes, waiting to see if he could successfully maneuver the alliances, if Tarley would side with him, if the Redwynes would pledge. The ceremony itself took place in Highgarden's Great Hall. The new throne stood at the far end of the expansive chamber, elevated on a dais. The hall was adorned with green and gold roses, every bench filled with lords, ladies, knights, and envoys from across the reach. An expectant hush clung to the air like fog upon a field. Loras wore armor of white steel and gold filigree, a subtle echo of the armor he had once worn as the Knight of Flowers. Over it, he wore a cloak of deep green velvet embroidered with golden roses. His hair was cropped shorter than in his youth, and a slight scar still marked his temple from a wound taken in battle. He looked strong, tempered, no longer the callow youth who dazzled the lists. Standing near him were Ser Rabar Royce, Ser John Fossaway, and a retinue of other knights who had pledged early. Maester Harold stood to one side, clutching a great parchment that bore the new royal titles Loras intended to claim. As the sun streamed through the colored glass windows, Loras stepped forward. The hush deepened. He surveyed the crowd, searching for the eyes of Randall Tarley, Baylor Hightower, Paxter Redwyne, Alistair Florent, men whose acceptance he needed. They all watched him solemnly. Taking a steady breath, he began to speak. Lords of the Reach, we gather here in a moment that will echo through history. For centuries, our land has served as the breadbasket of Westeros, the jewel of the South, the strong trunk from which others have plucked fruit. For centuries, we have bent the knee to kings in King's Landing, always hoping they would protect us and respect our might. But we have been disappointed. Our sons have died on distant fields, our daughters married off to placate alliances that served interests not our own. We have grown strong, and so have the ambitions of those who covet our harvests. He paused, letting his voice resonate. Today I take a bold step, one born of necessity. I declare the Reach a free and independent kingdom. By right of blood, by right of service, by right of guardianship over this bounteous land, I, Loras Tyrell, claim the throne of the Reach. I promise to rule with fairness and justice, to protect our people from the outside threats that loom. We will feed ourselves, defend ourselves, and trade on terms beneficial to us, not to a distant throne. He motioned to Maester Harold, who handed him a simple but elegant crown. It had been crafted hastily yet with skill, made from interwoven gold branches shaped to resemble vines, with small roses fashioned from emeralds and jade. The symbolism was clear, a crown grown from the fertile land of the Reach. Loras held it aloft, heart pounding, uncertain how many truly supported him. I do not do this for personal glory, he continued, voice echoing in the silent hall. But if glory will bind us together, let it be the glory of the Reach, not of Lannister or Baratheon or Targaryen. Lords of the South, will you stand with me? A beat of silence. Then Paxter Redwyne, well-fed and red-nosed, rose from his seat. The Arbor stands with the Tyrells, he declared. We have no desire to bow to a broken throne in King's Landing. We will supply ships and wine for the new kingdom. A rumble of approval spread among the assembled Redwyne knights. Loras felt a wave of relief. The Redwine fleet was the greatest naval force in the Reach. Having it on his side was a massive boon. Next, Baelor Hightower rose. The Hightowers will not see Old Town torn asunder in another pointless war of succession. We will stand with you, if you keep your promise to safeguard our city's neutrality and prosperity. The Hightowers acknowledge Loras Tyrell as King of the Reach. More applause. Then came Alistair Florent, uneasy but following the tide, bowing stiffly. House Florent acknowledges you, in hopes we find a new dawn for the Reach. That was less enthusiastic, but acceptance nonetheless. Loras scanned for Tarly. Randall Tarly did not immediately stand. The hush was palpable. Then slowly he rose. He wore no expression beyond his habitual scowl. The Tarleys value discipline and strength. We have long served the Reach, though we have not always agreed with House Tyrell's decisions. Yet I see no better option for these times. Sworn to your cause, we will not waver, if you do not. He inclined his head, a gesture almost as good as a knee bow from such a proud man. May the gods help you if you falter, Tyrell. A roar of excitement and relief ran through the hall. Tarly's acceptance was the final piece that ensured broad support among the major houses. The lesser lords, seeing the tide of unity, began standing and declaring their pledges as well. Some doubtless harbored reservations, but the momentum was overwhelming. Loras Tyrell, once the Knight of Flowers, was now the proclaimed King of the Reach. With solemn grace, Loras placed the golden crown upon his head. It felt heavier than he expected, pressing down on him like the weight of centuries. Applause thundered through the great hall. The Tyrell banners seemed to glow in the shafts of sunlight. Flowers strewn upon the floor, delicate rose petals, were trampled by the excited lords and knights. When the cheering subsided, Loras raised a hand. You honor me with your trust. I vow to repay that trust with wise governance. First, let it be known that every house assembled here retains its rights over its traditional lands. No house shall be diminished under my reign. Second, let it be known that we welcome trade from Dorne, the Westerlands, and beyond the sea, so long as it is conducted peacefully. Third, we shall begin fortifying our borders immediately to deter any would-be invaders. The Mander, the Honeywine, and our western passes shall be guarded. We will rely on Tarly's discipline, on the Hightower's knowledge, on Redwine's fleet, on Florent's cunning, on Rowan's resources, on Oakheart's valor. We stand as one. Again, applause erupted. Men raised cups of wine, toasted to the new king. Loras felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose that both thrilled and terrified him. He thought of the old Gardner kings, how they had ended with the field of fire. He swore to himself that he would not repeat their fate. He would be cunning, strong, and just enough to keep the Reach intact. He would not allow a new field of fire to consume them. The festivities went on well into the evening. Minstrels played vibrant tunes. The great kitchens served course after course of delicacies. Wine flowed freely, and for a night, the tension seemed to dissolve into revelry. Randall Tarly did not openly participate in the drinking games, but Loras saw him speaking quietly with other knights, perhaps forging alliances or simply gauging the mood. Paxter Redwine laughed loudly with Baelor Hightower over cups of arbor gold, forging a newfound camaraderie. Loras made rounds through the hall, exchanging words with the lords, thanking them for their presence, ensuring they felt seen and valued. He wore the crown throughout, feeling its pressure as a tangible reminder of his new station. Many times that evening, he remembered Renly Baratheon's fleeting claim to the Iron Throne, how Loras had once believed wholeheartedly in Renly's capacity for mild and just leadership. Now Loras had stepped into a similar role, yet with the advantage of having witnessed how easily claims fall apart without unity. He would not squander the loyalty he had gathered here. In a quieter moment, Loras stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Highgarden's moonlit gardens. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air wash over him, clearing the din of music and voices from his mind. A swirl of fireflies danced among the roses below. The Mander's water reflected moonlight like polished silver. The entire night felt surreal, as if a page from a dream had come to life. He had crowned himself king of the Reach. The easy part, securing initial pledges, was over. Now came the hard part of holding them together. He recalled Tarly's warning, "May the gods help you if you falter." So much could go wrong. The Iron Throne might eventually send an army or a cunning diplomat. If the new king there, whoever he was, consolidated power, he might turn his gaze south. A Targaryen, real or pretender, might attempt to rally forces under the banner of old loyalties. The Vale, the North, the Stormlands, Dorne, all were uncertain. The smallest shift could spark a new war. Here, now, on this balcony, Loras resolved that he would do everything in his power to prevent the devastation of the Reach. It was not enough to proclaim independence. He must defend it with all the skill he possessed. As he stood there, Ser Rabar Royce joined him, the hum of music drifting in the background. "Your Grace," Rabar said softly, using the royal address for the first time. "You have accomplished what many thought impossible." Loras let out a soft chuckle. "Now I must ensure it does not unravel. For that, I will rely on men like you, Rabar." Rabar bowed. "You have my sword, as always." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the distant laughter and clinking of cups. At length, Rabar said, "There is a matter. Lord Paxter Redwine mentioned that a few of his ships recently had run-ins with Ironborn raiders off the coast. Nothing too serious, but we should be prepared for possible piracy. With the chaos in the realm, the Iron Islands might see an opening to plunder." Loras sighed. "That would be just our luck. The day I ascend to this new throne, reavers come prowling. Inform the Redwines that their fleet should increase patrols. We will not tolerate Ironborn harassing our shores." Rabar nodded. "I will. And, Your Grace, remember you are not alone in these burdens. Let me bear some of it. You are our king, but you also remain a knight who has fought with us. We will share this load." Loras appreciated the sentiment. He clapped Rabar's shoulder. "Thank you. I'll hold you to that." The feast lasted until the sky began to lighten. Many lords stumbled to their chambers, drunk on arbor wine and the excitement of a new era. With a new day's dawn, Loras Tyrell awoke as king of the Reach. The bannermen prepared to depart, returning to their keeps and lands with the news. Some would begin fortifying their borders, some would handle local matters, but all were expected to heed the calls of Highgarden if trouble arose. Tarly, as promised, took on the role of Master of War. The Redwines readied their ships. Baelor Hightower returned to Old Town to see that the city would remain open for trade and learning. In the weeks that followed, letters poured forth from Highgarden, proclaiming the independence of the Reach to any who might care. Some found their way to King's Landing, if there was anyone left to read them in an official capacity. Others went to the lords of the Westerlands, the Stormlands, even Dorne and the North. Offers of trade, statements of neutrality unless attacked, invitations to talk. More quietly, Loras reached out to Dorne, knowing old grudges might hinder an alliance, but also recognizing Dorne's potential as an ally if the Iron Throne turned hostile. Within the Reach, there was a cautious sense of optimism among the small folk. They hoped, at least, that a king who resided in Highgarden would be more mindful of their plight than a king in a distant city. Taxes might be collected at more reasonable rates, and the men might not be called to die in foreign wars. Loras toured some of the villages, accompanied by a small retinue, meeting the people face to face. He listened to their grievances, heard their stories of how bandits had plagued the roads, and assured them it would be taken care of. The King of the Reach was not a distant figure, they realized, but a knight who had once been known across the land for his prowess and chivalry. That gave many hope, even if the future remained uncertain. Inevitably, the first test of Loras's rule came from within. A pair of minor lords along the southwestern border, House Blackbar of Bandolin and House Peak of Starpike, had old feuds that reignited amid the shift in power. Blackbar men had seized a portion of land claimed by Peak, likely suspecting that the new monarchy had too many other concerns to intervene quickly. House Peak responded by threatening to raise a Blackbar village. Tensions threatened to escalate into open skirmishes. Word reached Highgarden swiftly, and Loras decided to intervene immediately. "We cannot allow petty feuds to tear the Reach apart," he declared to his council of advisors, which included Tarly, Redwine, Fossaway, and Hightower in a more informal capacity. "If we permit this, others will think we cannot enforce unity." Randall Tarly agreed wholeheartedly. "Nip this in the bud. Show them that your rule has teeth." In response, Loras raised a small force, larger than a retinue but not a full army. He marched southward with Tarly at his side, demonstrating unity between the crown and its master of war. They arrived in the contested lands in days, riding hard. House Blackbar's forces were ill-prepared for a direct confrontation with the new king and the formidable Tarly Knights. Loras demanded to meet both parties in a field near the disputed territory. Grudgingly, they obeyed. In that tense meeting, Loras listened to both sides, recognized the underlying greed in House Blackbar's move, and the simmering thirst for retaliation in House Peak. He declared that the seized lands must be returned, that any damages must be repaid, and that both houses would forfeit a portion of their harvest as a penalty for disturbing the king's peace. It was a harsh measure, but Loras needed to send a message that the old feuds would not be tolerated under his watch. House Blackbar hesitated, but with Tarly's men arrayed in a silent threat, they submitted. House Peak accepted, though not without bitterness. Loras made it clear that a second offense would result in far graver consequences. Returning to Highgarden with the dispute settled, Loras felt some relief. His first internal challenge as king was resolved peacefully, without the need for a pitched battle. But he also sensed how fragile the unity was. The lords feared him and Tarly's might. That fear might keep them in line for now, but fear alone would not breed loyalty forever. He needed to reward loyalty as well, to show that the new order benefited those who cooperated. He began forging small improvements. Improved roads, more consistent patrols against bandits, better price regulation on grain. These measures aimed to show the realm that the King of the Reach was not merely a self-anointed figure seeking prestige, but a ruler who intended to improve the lot of his people. He also used Tarly's discipline to whip the Tyrell forces into shape, taking from Randall's strict training methods. The knights and men-at-arms of Highgarden began drilling more frequently, forging an army that might stand a chance against any external threat. Even the lesser lords were encouraged to train their levies better, with the promise of shared equipment and knowledge from Tarly's masters-at-arms. "An untrained army is no army at all," Tarly gruffly insisted, and Loras backed him. He had learned from bitter experience the cost of half-prepared forces in open war. Despite these efforts, news from beyond the Reach trickled in, stoking worries. Rumors spoke of a new power rising in King's Landing. Some claimed it was a hastily assembled council of wealthy merchants and lesser lords. Others claimed a surviving Targaryen rumored to be raising sellswords in Essos. Still others spoke of the Vale turning inward, refusing to entangle itself in the realm's affairs, or that the Riverlands were in the throes of chaos as local warlords vied for position. Unrest was the word that best described Westeros. Amid that unrest, the proclamation that the Reach had set itself apart as an independent kingdom spread far and wide. Some scoffed, doubting it could last. Others quietly applauded, thinking that perhaps the fracturing of the Iron Throne was inevitable. In Dorne, some spoke of forging an alliance with this new king of the Reach, remembering how the Martells once suffered under Targaryen rule but eventually maintained independence. If the Martells saw a reflection of their own stance in Loras's move, they might approach with an open hand. Or they might remain aloof, weighty. Months passed. Highgarden grew into a seat of royal authority, with visiting envoys, expanded guard posts, and the beginnings of a functional royal court. Tarly oversaw the mustering of men, the forging of new alliances with local sellsword companies, and the creation of a chain of beacons across the Reach to warn of invasion. Redwine improved port defenses. Hightower assured that Old Town would remain the beating heart of knowledge, open to maesters, scholars, and merchants, but also discreetly prepared for siege if the worst came. Loras himself navigated the delicate task of balancing pardons and punishments, taxing the lords just enough to maintain a strong centralized force without inciting rebellion. He found that ruling was an endless series of compromises. Give House Huey a concession to keep them content, then ensure House Fossaway is not slighted. Calm House Oakhart's jealousy over a perceived slight by Rowan. Address the seething resentment of House Florent, who still eyed a Targaryen restoration. Try to build a meaningful treaty with Dorne, but do not alienate Tarly's hawkish stance. And all the while, keep an ear out for any rumor of the Iron Throne's next move. One evening, after yet another exhausting day of juggling letters, court sessions, and training sessions with the knights, Loras found himself standing on the walls of Highgarden, looking out at the moonlit Mander. The sky was clear, the stars brilliant, the air cool against his face. He removed the crown from his head, resting it on a nearby merlon. The golden vines glimmered in the pale light. "King of the Reach," he murmured to himself, the words still carrying a faint air of unreality. He had taken on the weight of an entire region. How had Renly worn it so lightly? Or had he? Perhaps Loras had only seen the mask his lover wore, never the burden behind his smiling eyes. He felt a surge of both longing and resolve. Longing for a simpler time, for a world in which he could have remained the carefree knight of flowers, beloved by the crowds. Resolve because that world was gone, replaced by a harsh reality that demanded leaders who would protect their own, no matter the cost. "I will not fail," he whispered to the knight. "I cannot fail." Behind him, footsteps approached. Ser Rabar Royce's voice broke the quiet. "Your Grace, I bring word from the northern roads. A traveling band of merchants claims to have encountered scouts wearing Lannister colors. They say the scouts headed west, possibly toward the border, but it might be a sign the Westerlands are stirring." A chill that had nothing to do with the weather swept over Loras. The Westerlands. If they rally behind Casterly Rock's banner, they might test our defenses soon. Or they might just be scoping out the land to plan a move in the future. "Yes," Rabar agreed, voice low. "Shall we dispatch more scouts of our own? Increase patrols along the western roads?" "Do it," Loras said, steeling himself. "We must be ready. Let them see that we are not to be trifled with. If they come to raid, we will respond with force." Rabar bowed and hurried off. Loras remained on the wall, crown resting beside him. In the distance, the Mander flowed serenely, and the fields rolled away in gentle swells. It was a beautiful land, and it was his responsibility to protect it. He replaced the crown upon his head, as if reminding himself of the position he had chosen. Come what may, Loras Tyrell was determined to remain king of the Reach. He would stand as a bulwark for his homeland, refusing to back any outsider's claim, forging his own path in a fractured world. And in that quiet, moonlit moment, he felt the ghosts of his past. His father, his lovers, his siblings, standing with him, urging him onward, urging him to grow strong. Loras Tyrell rose at daybreak, crown still resting on his brow from the previous night's reflection. He had no illusions that a king could place his burdens on a shelf just because dawn arrived. A crown remained an ever-present weight. As he descended the winding stone staircase into the main courtyard of Highgarden, he saw men-at-arms already drilling in neat rows, their boots stamping the earth in unison. Beyond them, servants wheeled barrows of supplies from storerooms to larders, the scent of fresh bread mingling with morning dew. It was another day of kingship, and Loras breathed in the crisp air as though inhaling both power and trepidation. He made his way along the winding corridors, eventually entering the great hall where a simple breakfast had been laid out: bread, boiled eggs, fruit preserves, and fresh cider from the Highgarden orchards. Rabar Royce stood by a long trestle table, waiting quietly. Since the coronation, Ser Rabar had effectively taken on the duties of captain of the King's Guard, though Loras had not yet formalized such a title. Their relationship was one of mutual understanding. Rabar provided counsel with a measured perspective that Loras found increasingly valuable. "Your Grace," Rabar said with a small bow, "I've spoken with the knights on the western roads. They reported sightings of Lannister outriders in the last fortnight. The outriders have not crossed into our domain in force, but their presence is a sign the Westerlands are watching closely." Loras picked up a piece of bread, considering the news. Watching for any perceived weakness, no doubt, he replied. We expected as much. Still no word on any formal approach from Casterly Rock. None, Rabar answered. If anything, they appear to be testing our vigilance. One might guess they'll attempt to negotiate once they're certain we are not an easy target. Or they might come in force if they believe we are bluffing. Loras nodded thoughtfully. We are not bluffing, he said, more to himself than to Rabar. He had declared independence. That much was carved in stone. The only question was whether the Lannisters would attempt to reassert dominion or let the Reach be. Have Tarly's men increase their patrols in the western marches. If Lannister outriders cross our borders again, we take them into custody. If they resist, we ensure they do not return home to report anything. Rabar gave a solemn nod. Yes, Your Grace. They moved on from the hall and made their way through Highgarden's grand corridors, stepping outside into a burst of morning sunshine. The gardens stretched around them, riotous with color and sweet fragrance. Blues and purples of flowering herbs, brilliant reds of roses in full bloom, a tapestry of blossoms that swayed with the gentle breeze off the mander. To the side, a pair of gardeners tended to a rose trellis, silently trimming away dead petals. The hum of insects provided a peaceful chorus. Loras often found a moment's solace in these gardens, a reminder that this place was worth protecting from the turmoil roiling beyond its borders. A short while later, he convened his daily council in a smaller solar. The large council had grown to include representatives from all the major houses that had sworn him fealty. Tarly, of course, had a seat as master of war. Paxter Redwine came and went as he pleased, often dispatching messages from the arbor or leaving one of his trusted kin in his stead. Baylor Hightower occasionally arrived from Old Town, but more often he sent a nephew or cousin to keep him informed. House Rowan, House Oakhart, and House Florent also had informal envoys present. It was a delicate balancing act to keep them all cooperating rather than conspiring amongst themselves. By the time Loras arrived, Randall Tarly was already there, standing near the tall windows with his arms crossed. His sharp eyes took in every detail of the room, every person present, as though scanning for the slightest sign of weakness. Sir John Fossaway was here too, seated beside a large carafe of water, tapping his fingers on the table. Maester Harold presided over a cluster of scrolls, his ink-stained fingers sorting through the day's official correspondence. Loras sat at the head of a modest table. No throne here, just a seat that showed he presided, but not ostentatiously so. That had been his choice, to keep the daily business of ruling somewhat more approachable than the grand stage of the Great Hall. Once he settled, Tarly wasted no time. Your Grace, Randall said, with only the slightest incline of his head. The men are eager to test their mettle against any would-be intruders. My captains near the border with the Westerlands have proposed a series of forward watchtowers. It would be a costly endeavor, but may well deter the Lannisters. That said, I want to be certain you see the wisdom in a show of force. Loras looked at the others, reading their faces. John Fossaway, older and less brash than in his youth, nodded in agreement. A show of force might indeed be necessary. We did not secede from King's Landing only to be subjugated by the Lannisters from the west. House Rowan's envoy, a thin, bookish man named Walder Rowan, cleared his throat. Perhaps, though, we should consider a diplomatic approach first. The Lannisters are known to covet gold and power, but they are also shrewd. They may be open to trade arrangements, grain in exchange for precious metals or favorable coin. Tarly's lip curled in mild scorn. You assume the Lannisters will settle for trading coin rather than subjugating an entire region that once contributed to the Iron Throne. Casterly Rock is not known for humility. But they are not as powerful as they once were, countered Walder Rowan. If the rumors are true, King's Landing is no longer in Lannister hands. Their hold on the Westerlands could be firm, but they have no easy path to conquer a united Reach, especially if they suspect Dorne or the Stormlands might intervene for their own reasons. Loras tapped the table, bringing silence. Let us not dismiss either approach, he said. It seems prudent to fortify our border while also exploring any possibility for peace. I have no appetite for an unprovoked war, but nor will I leave us open to surprise attack. Lord Tarley, proceed with your plan for forward watchtowers, but do so carefully. We don't want to appear as though we're massing for an invasion of the Westerlands ourselves." Tarley offered a curt bow. "As you command, your grace." "Maester Harold," Loras continued, looking at the stooped older man, "draft a letter to the leading Lannister, whoever claims leadership over them now. We have heard conflicting reports about exactly which Lannister sits at the top. Reach out with a formal statement that we remain neutral regarding the affairs of King's Landing, that we desire no conflict with the Westerlands, but we will defend our sovereignty if tested." Maester Harold nodded, scribbling notes on a small parchment. "At once, your grace." John Fossaway shifted in his seat. "And news from the Iron Islands, if I may bring it up. We have scattered reports of their longships scouting the coast near the Shield Islands. The Redwynes have posted their ships there, but Paxter writes he cannot keep watch on every possibility. The Ironborn might raid somewhere else along the coast, maybe near Old Town's ports or the Arbor itself." Tarley grunted. "The Ironborn are a nuisance, but they rarely mount a full-scale invasion. They prefer raids. We should station a portion of the Redwyne fleet near the Mander's Mouth. Let them attempt a landing and see how they fare against the combined might of Redwyne galleys and Hightower crossbows." Loras considered it. "Caution is wise, but let's not overextend. The Redwynes must remain ready to defend the Arbor, and Old Town must not be left vulnerable. Distribute the fleet in a flexible manner. Keep scouts in small swift craft that can relay messages along the coast. If a significant Ironborn force is spotted, I want to know immediately." The council discussed smaller matters afterward. Taxes due from certain lesser lords, the next steps in building a more structured administration, continued expansions of the king's personal guard. By midday, Loras concluded the session. He remained in the solar with Tarley and Rabar, sensing that both men had more to say in private. Once the others had departed, Tarley said, "I'm impressed that so many houses have remained in line, Tyrell. I expected more trouble by now." A ghost of a smile tugged at Loras's lips. "They know unity is their best chance for stability. I think they're still testing whether I'm strong enough to hold them together. So far, we've avoided major conflict. That might change if the Lannisters or a Targaryen challenges us." Tarley nodded. "Indeed, the rumor mill is swirling with talk of a Targaryen building a Sellsword army across the Narrow Sea. If that horde arrives with dragons, and who knows if they truly have them, it could be a danger to us all." Loras had heard the same rumors. "We'll prepare for that as well. But we can't march out to intercept them on foreign soil. Our best recourse is to fortify our borders and remain vigilant." Rabar chimed in, his expression thoughtful. "There's a further consideration, Your Grace. The Stormlands remain in disarray as different Baratheon cousins or bastards jockey for power. But if one emerges with enough influence, they might seek either an alliance or a rivalry with us. We share a border with them along the Dornish marches. We should consider sending an envoy." Loras contemplated the idea. The Stormlands were indeed fractured, and with Storm's End uncertain of who truly commanded it, any contact might be precarious. But ignoring them entirely could be costly. "Find me someone discreet, someone who can handle the Stormlands' intrigues. Let's offer a cordial greeting. Let them know we are not bent on expansion. If they want trade, we'll negotiate. If they want war, we'll be ready." They spoke a while longer, then parted ways. Loras found himself strolling the halls once more, flanked by two guards bearing the Tyrell rose upon their cloaks. He felt an odd pang as he passed a mural depicting the old alliance that House Tyrell had held with the Iron Throne, a scene painted decades ago to commemorate Mace Tyrell's participation in royal ceremonies. The lines and colors had begun to fade, just as the relationships they once symbolized had faded away. Shaking off a wave of nostalgia, he continued onward. His future was not in that mural, but in the forging of something new. Late in the afternoon, Loras took to the practice yard. He still found time to train, refusing to let the burdens of kingship dull his sword arm. Dressed in lighter mail rather than his regal armor, He sparred with Rabar Royce before an audience of knights. The ring of steel echoed across the courtyard. Loras's footwork was graceful, reminiscent of the days when he was known throughout Westeros as the Knight of Flowers, a champion at tourneys, dazzling in skill and appearance alike. Now, his style was tempered by experience and scars. Rabar pressed an attack, his sword whistling toward Loras's flank. Loras spun aside, parrying with force that jarred Rabar's blade. Their swords met again, locked for a moment, each man testing the other's strength. Loras pushed off, stepping back. Sweat beaded his brow, but a grim set to his mouth showed he enjoyed the challenge. He came in low, feinting toward Rabar's knees, only to twist his wrist and slash upward in a controlled strike. Rabar barely deflected it, stumbling slightly. A murmur of appreciation rose from those watching. They still remembered the younger Loras, flamboyant in the lists. They saw now a king who had lost none of his skill. Rabar, regaining his balance, gave a sharp grin. "You fight like a man who has no crown weighing him down, Your Grace." "I wear the crown in my heart," Loras quipped, launching another quick cut. Rabar parried, but the force made him yield a step. They continued trading blows a few more moments until Loras found an opening and thwacked Rabar's shoulder with the flat of his blade. Rabar dropped to one knee, panting, acknowledging the strike. "Yield," he said. Applause and cheers broke out from the spectators. Loras offered Rabar a hand, pulling him to his feet. The knights gathered around, and Loras gave a small, wry smile. "Thank you for the bout, Sir Rabar. Let it be a reminder to us all that skill must be honed, even when one's name or crown makes one think otherwise." A few knights saluted, pledging to renew their training regimen. It was a moment of camaraderie that Loras treasured. This was what he wanted for the Reach, a unity forged not just by fear or necessity but by shared respect. When evening settled, Loras returned to his private chambers to bathe and dress in more comfortable attire. He found himself gazing out a high window, watching as the setting sun gilded the Mander's waters in shimmering gold. A servant knocked on the door, announcing that a messenger from Dorne had arrived. Intrigued, Loras quickly finished dressing, donned a modest circlet instead of his full crown, and made his way to the audience chamber. He found a slim, dark-haired Dornishman named Quentyn Santagar waiting, accompanied by two silent guards wearing the sun and spear emblem. They bowed, though the gesture was faint compared to the deeper inclinations of the Reach's own lords. Loras took his seat. "Quentyn Santagar, is it?" he asked politely. "Yes, Your Grace," the man said, voice smooth. "I bear greetings from Prince Doran Martell of Dorne, or rather from his successor, as Prince Doran passed some time ago. Dorne has a new leader, Prince Quentyn Martell, the late prince's grandson." Loras knew only fragments of Dorne's recent political shifts. The Martells were known for patience and subtlety, so it did not surprise him that word of the old prince's death had traveled slowly. "My condolences," Loras said. Prince Doran was an esteemed figure, a man of quiet intelligence. Quentyn Santagar inclined his head. "That he was. Prince Quentyn Martell sends word that Dorne has taken note of the Reach's recent transformation. He wishes to extend a cautious hand of friendship, provided the new king in Highgarden has no intentions of hostility against Dorne." Loras managed a small smile. "None whatsoever. In fact, my hope is to see a lasting peace between our two regions. The hostilities between the Reach and Dorne are ancient, but if the rest of Westeros tears itself apart, we might stand stronger by cooperating." Quentyn Santagar nodded politely. "That is precisely the sentiment my prince wished me to convey. He proposes a formal treaty of non-aggression and open trade between the Reach and Dorne. There is also a matter of possible collaboration regarding the Dornish marches. The prince suggests that if House Ironwood or House Fowler continues to chafe at the border, we might solve these disputes diplomatically, preventing raids or petty skirmishes." Loras felt immediate relief. This was exactly the kind of alliance he had hoped for, a southern neighbor with no designs on subjugating the Reach. "Tell your prince I welcome such an accord. Let us exchange letters more thoroughly." Perhaps I will send an envoy to Sunspear, or Prince Quentin might visit Highgarden. I'd prefer to sign a treaty face-to-face, if possible. Quentin bowed. I will relay your words. For now, consider this an overture. Dorne does not involve itself lightly in the affairs north of the Red Mountains, but we see an opportunity for mutual benefit. After a few more courtesies, Quentin departed, promising to await a written reply before leaving Highgarden. Loras felt buoyed by the encounter. A stable relationship with Dorne would secure the southern border and free up resources to watch the Westerlands and any sea raiders. Progress, he thought, even as countless other concerns pressed. He composed a reply that very night with Maester Harald's help, extending gratitude for Dorne's gesture. He expressed the desire to negotiate a trade treaty that would allow Dornish goods, wine, spices, silks, to flow freely into the Reach, while the Reach's wheat, barley, fruits, and roses might travel south. The mention of mutual respect for the marches was included, ensuring that both realms agreed to quell banditry or rogue lords. He signed it as Loras Tyrell, King of the Reach, the ink still feeling strange beneath his stylized signature. Yet it was real, an official act of monarchy. With that done, he retired to bed, exhaustion weighing on his limbs. But sleep eluded him for a time. He lay in the dim glow of a bedside candle, staring up at the ceiling's painted vines and roses, listening to the hush of the night wind. The responsibilities of his new station circled his thoughts. He had no illusions that forging an independent kingdom was easy, and he suspected the hardest trials were yet to come. Still, a measure of determination kindled in his chest as he finally let his eyes close and drifted into uneasy dreams. Within a fortnight, word arrived from the Stormlands, or rather, from a faction that claimed to hold Storm's End in the name of House Baratheon. A knight named Ser Axelfels had penned a letter stating that a Lord Paramount Andrew Baratheon, some rumored cousin of the main line, considered the secession of the Reach an affront to the old oaths. They demanded to know Loras's intentions regarding any southwestern territories near the Dornish marches. The letter stopped short of threats but bristled with suspicion and a hint of arrogance. Loras read it with a faint grimace. He was seated in the solar, Tarly and Rabar near him, and the tension in the air was thick enough to coil around them. When he finished, he set it down and exhaled slowly. A letter from a self-styled Baratheon, he said, handing it to Tarly. They're demanding we clarify our stance. In short, they're worried we'll push eastward and claim part of the Stormlands. Tarly skimmed it, lips curling. They call your crowning an affront to the old oaths. Convenient how they ignore that the entire realm is in chaos. Old oaths to which king? He tossed the letter onto the table. If they were truly strong, they'd have already rallied the Stormlands behind them. Instead, they poke at us with words, hoping we'll yield. Rabar frowned. We should not be hasty in dismissing them. If a strong Baratheon faction unites the Stormlands, they could become a threat or a potential ally. The Stormlands have endured fewer internal conflicts than the Crownlands or the Riverlands, from what I hear. They might unify quickly around a single claimant. We shouldn't invite war on yet another front. Loras steepled his fingers. Agreed. Let's respond in measured terms. We reaffirm that the Reach has no claim on Stormland territory. We hold that we simply declared our own independence, with no aggression toward them or their ambitions. If they desire trade or dialogue, we welcome it. We do not welcome threats. Shall I write that politely? Asked Tarly, arching a brow. Politely but firmly, Loras replied. We must leave them no doubt that the Reach won't be cowed by saber rattling. Thus, another letter was penned, sealed, and sent. Days turned into weeks, and the slow dance of diplomacy continued while Loras oversaw the strengthening of the realm. Watchtowers rose on the western border. Patrols scouted for Lannister outriders, chasing away a few small parties that dared stray too far. The Redwine fleet secured the coasts, turning aside a small group of Ironborn marauders near the Shield Islands. No major battle, just a chase that ended with some singed longships. Dorne's envoy remained in Highgarden, fostering a sense of goodwill. Loras also sent a small retinue to Sunspear, bearing gifts of honey, apples, and the finest wines from the arbor. The response was warm. Quentin Martell expressed optimism about a future meeting in person. In quieter moments, Loras took care to revisit the daily life of the people. He toured farmland along the Mander, meeting with reeves and bailiffs. He found that, for the most part, the small folk were relieved not to be facing fresh levies for some distant war in King's Landing. Taxes remained, but Loras tried to keep them fair. Roads were patrolled. Bandits quickly dispersed. In some villages, folks greeted him with cheers, offering him simple gifts of fresh flowers or hand-woven cloth. It was humbling, and he knew these gestures sprang from relief rather than pure adoration. Still, seeing them lifted his spirits. And yet, under the calm surface, tensions simmered. Not every lord was content with the new monarchy. Some chafed at Tarley's influence, others at Loras's moral authority. Some whispered that Marjorie Tyrell, once queen in King's Landing, might appear and lay her own claims or complicate the Reach's alliances. Others still pinned their hopes on a rumored Targaryen restoration, believing that if a true Targaryen re-emerged, the old oaths might resume, and Tyrell's independence would be undone. Loras's network of informants kept him apprised of hush-hush gatherings and seditious talk. Much of it was idle speculation, but he remained wary. One such whisper claimed that House Florent, never entirely satisfied with Tyrell rule, had begun sending envoys to Essos to glean the truth about this new Targaryen claimant. Alistair Florent, who had bent the knee at the coronation, was rumored to be among those who believed the Tyrell monarchy might be short-lived if a proper Targaryen with dragons arrived. Loras confronted Alistair in Highgarden's Rose Garden after hearing these rumors. The older man, fox-faced and stiff of posture, denied everything. "My king," Alistair said, hand over his heart. "House Florent is loyal to you. We do not sow division, nor do we consort with foreign pretenders." Loras kept his tone calm but firm. "Rumor has it otherwise, Lord Florent. I would not see a friend of the throne tarnished by baseless gossip. But if you are indeed reaching out across the sea, let us speak plainly." Alistair feigned shock, lines deepening on his forehead. "I assure you, these are foul lies. If any of my kin is acting without my approval, I will see them disciplined." "See that you do," said Loras, voice edged with warning. "For the sake of the Reach, we cannot tolerate clandestine alliances. Should you discover a traitor in your midst, come to me immediately. My policy is that all lords who stand under the rose must stand united." Alistair bowed stiffly and retreated, leaving Loras unconvinced but with no direct proof. He turned to Rabar, who had stood at a discreet distance. "He's hiding something," Loras said quietly. "I fear so," Rabar agreed. "Should we place watchers on Florent's couriers and ravens?" "Yes," Loras decided. Quietly, the next weeks brought the first real confrontation on the western border. A band of armed men was intercepted near the pass leading into the Westerlands. They bore no heraldry, but some carried Lannister coin, and their leader was recognized as a known retainer of House Marbrand. They claimed to be merchants, but they carried more swords than wares. Tarley's men detained them. Under threat of harsh interrogation, they admitted they had been hired to scout for vulnerabilities. River crossings, lightly guarded watchtowers, villages that might be easily raided. House Marbrand was a close ally of the Lannisters, so it seemed the Westerlands were indeed probing for weakness. Loras sent a messenger to Casterly Rock, demanding an explanation. The official response came 2 weeks later, delivered by a Lannister knight named Ser Jaime Prester. Loras received him in Highgarden's Great Hall, the new throne looming behind him. The crowd was a mix of Tyrell knights, Tarley's men, and other lords who happened to be visiting. Ser Jaime Prester approached with forced politeness. "King Loras," he began, carefully enunciating the title. "I come on behalf of Lord Daemon Lannister, current head of House Lannister. The men you apprehended were acting without his express authority. They were misguided adventurers seeking to exploit uncertain times. Lord Daemon regrets any misunderstanding." Loras's gaze remained cool. I find it difficult to believe such men operate so close to Lannister territory without Lannister knowledge. But let us set that aside. If your lord regrets these incidents, perhaps he should cease sending outriders and hirelings to test our borders. Ser Jaime Prester frowned. Lord Daemon wishes to propose a mutual pact of non-aggression, provided the Reach does not interfere with trade routes across the Blackwater or the roads west. House Lannister understands your desire for autonomy, but will not tolerate threats to Westerman caravans that pass near your borders. Loras exchanged a glance with Tyrell. This was almost a mirror of the letter they had planned to send themselves, though the Lannister approach felt laced with a subtle threat. "We have no interest in raiding caravans," Loras said at length. "We want peaceful borders. So let me be clear, any incursion we detect upon our territory, be it from the Lannisters or their allies, will be met with force. If you keep to your side, we will keep to ours. Trade may continue so long as your merchants pay any customary tolls for passing through our domain, as is standard in any realm." Ser Jaime Prester inclined his head. "I will convey your words to Lord Daemon. We ask that you release those men who were apprehended, as a gesture of good faith." Loras considered it, then nodded. "We will release them, but they will be escorted back to your border and warned never to return under such circumstances. If they do, they forfeit their lives." The envoy seemed relieved, thanked Loras, and left. After the doors closed, Tyrell turned to Loras. "It seems the Lannisters are not prepared for outright war. They've tested us and found us watchful, so now they're stepping back to talk." Loras ran a hand through his hair, relieved but still wary. "It's better than a siege, but I don't trust them. We'll keep an eye on the border. If they sense we grow complacent, they may strike." Baelor Hightower, who had observed from the sidelines, stepped forward. "The Hightowers will maintain vigilance as well, Your Grace. But we welcome an uneasy peace. Old Town thrives on commerce. War with the Westerlands would hamper our trade. Let us hope the Lannisters remain content behind their hills of gold." With this exchange, a sort of precarious calm settled over the border. Scouts reported fewer sightings of Lannister outriders, though the watchtowers remained manned. It was not a true peace, but more a mutual pause while each side solidified its position. Meanwhile, news came from the east that a Targaryen claimant had indeed begun mustering in Essos, though the scale was uncertain. Whispers spoke of 3 dragons or none or a dozen, depending on who told the tale. Loras took it all with a grain of salt. He did not dismiss the threat, but had no reason to panic yet. If a Targaryen invasion came, it would likely crash upon the Stormlands or King's Landing first. The Reach, behind its wide rivers and fertile fields, would watch closely. Loras also received a letter from Margaery Tyrell, his sister, one of the first communications he'd had from her since the fracturing of the realm. The letter arrived in secret, carried by a sellsword who claimed to have parted ways with Margaery's retinue near the Crownlands. Loras read it in private, heart pounding with old memories. "My beloved brother, I have heard of your coronation in Highgarden, King of the Reach. If father could see you now, I imagine he would puff up with pride, or perhaps fret. I do not know how you have managed such a bold move, but I hope you are safe and that our homeland flourishes under your rule. I write from a precarious position near the Crownlands, where the remnants of those who once supported my claims and ambitions linger. Times are desperate, and the lines of allegiance shift each day. I do not know if I will remain here much longer. If it is in your power, know that I long to see Highgarden again. Yet I also know your throne cannot be threatened by old alliances I once had. I do not wish to imperil you. Take heart and stay vigilant. The realm is restless, and there are many who would see the Tyrells torn down for their own gain. If I can, I will find a way to come to you, or at least to a safer place from which I can write again. Until then, remember that I love you, dear brother. Yours, Margaery." He read the letter twice, feeling a mixture of relief and worry. Margaery was alive, it seemed, but caught in the swirl of post-Lannister intrigues near the Crownlands. She was diplomatic enough to hide her location and any direct pleas for assistance, for fear her enemies might intercept the letter. Loras's heart ached to have her back in Highgarden. He missed her confidence, her light laughter, and her uncanny skill at weaving alliances. Yet he also feared that her presence might complicate the stability he'd worked so hard to build. Some lords might recall her alliances with various claimants. He set the letter aside, mind buzzing, and resolved to keep it secret for the moment. As winter's edge began creeping through the nights, though in the Reach winter was gentler than in the north, Loras turned his attention to ensuring there were sufficient provisions should the colder season prove harsher than usual. He ordered surpluses stored and reinforced the granaries in case of raiders. The small folk sometimes worried that war could still come at any moment, so Loras tried to project calm certainty. He instituted festivals in local towns, well provisioned by Highgarden, to maintain morale. In quieter corners, though, the talk of a Targaryen invasion grew louder. One frigid morning, a new Dornish envoy arrived in a swirl of orange and gold clothing, warming the halls of Highgarden with talk of Prince Quentyn Martell's interest in an official summit. Loras convened a small council to discuss the logistics. If Prince Quentyn traveled to Highgarden, it would be a significant gesture. No reigning Martell had set foot in the Reach for many years, certainly not for a friendly visit. He proposes a grand meeting here to sign a treaty of non-aggression and trade, Maester Harold explained. In a month's time, if we can accommodate him. Tarly crossed his arms. Let him come, but we must ensure security. Old rivalries die hard, and not everyone in the Reach has forgiven old Dornish raids. Loras nodded. Agreed. We'll place an honor guard around him, but also watch him closely. Peace is precious. We don't want any fool with a long grudge to sabotage the summit. They sent acceptance, and over the following weeks, preparations began. Staterooms were decorated with Dornish and Tyrell colors, feasts planned with both Dornish and Reach culinary traditions. Loras also arranged for additional patrols on the roads leading from the southern borders. The last thing he needed was to have the Martell party ambushed by brigands, or by some misguided lord out for vengeance. He declared that any attempt on the Dornish delegation would be considered treason against the crown of the Reach. Tarly's men carried that warning far and wide. When Prince Quentyn Martell finally arrived, it was on a mild afternoon that felt more like autumn than the onset of winter. He rode at the head of a modest procession, 20 men, including knights and advisors. Dornish banners fluttered orange and red, embroidered suns blazing in the wind. Quentyn himself was a man in his early 30s, with olive skin, dark hair, and a calm, thoughtful bearing. He dismounted before the gates of Highgarden, gazing up at the sweeping walls and the bloom of winter roses still thriving in sheltered beds. Loras greeted him personally in the courtyard, flanked by Tarly and Rabar. Prince Quentyn, said Loras with a respectful bow of his head. Welcome to Highgarden. You honor us with your presence. Prince Quentyn bowed in return. King Loras Tyrell, I am pleased to see the famed seat of the Reach. My father once told me tales of Highgarden's beauty. I see they were no exaggeration. The pleasantries continued as they led the prince and his retinue into the castle. Servants took the horses, and soon the Dornish guests found themselves in comfortable quarters, warmed by braziers and decorated with tapestries. A feast was planned for that very evening, followed by negotiations in the days to come. That night, the great hall shone with candles and torchlight. Musicians played a mix of Reach ballads and Dornish tunes, weaving an otherworldly sound that mingled with the chatter of guests. The tables groaned under plates of spiced meats, fresh-baked bread, honey-glazed vegetables, and fruit tarts, accompanied, of course, by the best vintages of Arbor Gold and Dornish Sour Reds. Loras presided from his new throne, wearing his crown of interwoven golden vines and emerald roses. At his side sat Prince Quentyn Martell as the guest of honor. All around them, lords from various houses, Hightower, Rowan, Oakhart, Florent, Beesbury, Fossaway, mingled with Dornish knights and envoys, each side eyeing the other with curiosity or caution. When the meal concluded, Loras stood, raising a cup. My friends, let us toast to this gathering. For many years, our realms have stood on opposite sides of bitter conflicts. but the world has changed. Tonight, we are not enemies. We are neighbors. May this moment herald a new age of peace and mutual prosperity between Dorne and the Reach." Prince Quentyn raised his own cup. "I echo King Loras's sentiments. Dorne has spent generations wary of threats from the north, but if we stand side by side, we can thrive while the rest of Westeros sorts out its endless quarrels." He took a drink, and the hall resounded with applause. The festivities continued deep into the night. Loras kept a watchful eye on any signs of tension, but most lords present appeared at least outwardly civil. Lord Alistair Florent nursed his cups of wine in a corner, wearing a mask of politeness. Randall Tarley did not drink heavily. He stood sentinel near Loras, as though expecting trouble. But trouble never came, at least not that night. By the time the candles had burned low, Loras felt a cautious optimism that this alliance could take root. Over the next few days, formal negotiations took place. Prince Quentyn brought up the usual matters: trade routes, tolls, the security of caravans crossing the Dornish marches, the potential for an official exchange of ambassadors to live at each other's courts. Loras gladly entertained these points, though he insisted on clarifying that the marches, historically contested, would remain in the hands of whichever families held them. Tarley, Cairn, Fowler, Ironwood, without attempts at forced expansion. Prince Quentyn agreed but asked for a formal pledge that no raids or expansions would be tolerated by either side. They drafted a document known as the Highgarden Sunspear Accord, which spelled out mutual defense and trade rights. If either side faced unprovoked invasion from a third party, the other would consider aiding them, but was not strictly bound to do so. It was a careful dance around the word ally, as each realm did not want to be dragged into a foreign war. However, the terms were enough to lay the groundwork for peace. A ceremonial signing was arranged in Highgarden's courtyard under the bright midday sun. Loras and Quentyn Martell stood before gathered witnesses, including Tarley, Baelor Hightower, Paxter Redwine, and many more. Scribes wrote out the text in elegant script on parchment. Then Loras dipped a quill into ink, signing Loras Tyrell, King of the Reach. Prince Quentyn Martell followed with Quentyn Martell, Prince of Dorne. With that, the crowd cheered, though perhaps not as loudly as they might have had the old enmities not run so deep. That night, as Loras was set to retire, Quentyn Martell requested a private audience. Loras, curious, agreed, inviting him to a smaller solar warmed by a single hearth. They sat across from each other on high-backed chairs, a decanter of Dornish wine between them. Quentyn looked composed, though there was a flicker of something more in his dark eyes. "You wish to speak further?" Loras asked, taking a modest sip of wine. Quentyn nodded. "I do. I sense your generosity, King Loras, and I believe you are sincere about forging a new path. As it happens, I have received word, some quiet rumors, that might interest you. They come from my correspondence in Essos." Loras's grip tightened on his cup. "You speak of the rumored Targaryen Claimant?" "Yes. She is said to be a young woman, apparently calling herself Daenerys Stormborn, though I had heard that name once in older tales. Rumor says she has dragons, small ones but real, and she gathers sellswords to attempt a conquest. She began in Slaver's Bay, freeing slaves, building alliances. The stories are half legend already. Yet my correspondents say she truly does have living dragons, and that the sellsword companies of the free cities are flocking to her cause." Loras let out a slow breath. "If that is the case, she poses the greatest threat to whichever armies stand in her path. The last Targaryen invasion ended at the Field of Fire, the event that nearly wiped out House Gardner and led to House Tyrell's ascension. This is daunting news." "Indeed," Quentyn agreed. "If she lands in Westeros, she may target King's Landing first, or the Stormlands, or possibly even Dorne, given our histories with House Targaryen. I share this with you because, as your southern neighbor, we face similar risks should this Daenerys come south. Or perhaps she might seek to court us as allies. Targaryens are known for turning old foes into friends if it suits them." Loras's mind raced. "I appreciate your candor. I have heard fragments of such stories myself, but not with this detail. If Daenerys Targaryen arrives, we must decide whether to resist her or open negotiations. The realm is fractured. She might unite it under her banner, or break it further in flame. A silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire. Quentin sipped his wine. Dorne has never bent easily to outside rule. We may well decide to remain separate, but if her dragons are as formidable as ancient tales suggest, we might have little choice. My hope is that if we, the Reach and Dorne, stand united, we can at least negotiate from a position of strength. Loras stared into the fire, recalling the dusty tomes in Highgarden that recounted the Field of Fire. They told how dragons had scorched the combined armies of the Reach and the Rock. Aegon the Conqueror had left tens of thousands burned upon the field. The threat was no myth. "Prince Quentin," he said, voice low, "whatever else happens, the Reach will not give up its sovereignty without just cause. We want peace, but we won't simply kneel to a new Targaryen, nor to any other claimants. I appreciate your warning. Let us keep each other informed of any developments." Quentin inclined his head in agreement. "I will do so. For now, let us sign the accord in good faith. We have each other's ears." They parted on that note, a sense of mutual respect growing between them. In the days that followed, the Dornish party lingered, exchanging courtesies and discussing logistics of trade caravans. Then they departed for the desert roads, leaving behind a signed accord and an undercurrent of both hope and trepidation for what the future held. The winter months in the Reach were mild, but the winds turned colder, and frost rimed the edges of the gardens at dawn. Loras noticed fewer vibrant blooms, though roses still persisted in the more sheltered corners. The castle's great halls remained warm with fires, but the small folk in outlying villages needed supplies to stave off the chill. Loras arranged distributions of extra food and clothing, spurred by both compassion and the desire to maintain loyalty. When the snow finally did come, light flurries drifting over Highgarden, it seemed a novelty. Children in the courtyard tried to catch snowflakes on their tongues. The older knights grumbled about the cold but conceded it was nothing compared to the icy grip of the north. The roads remained passable, and trade continued. Dorne, likewise, sent word that they were preparing shipments of their winter produce, as meager as it was, in exchange for the Reach's surpluses. During this lull, Loras focused on strengthening Highgarden's internal administration. He appointed a master of coin, Ser John Fossaway, who, though a knight, had a surprisingly keen head for finances. A master of laws was found in a Rowan cousin with legal training from the Citadel. The seeds of a formal small council began to sprout, making his governance more structured. The step was subtle but signaled Loras's intent to behave as a stable monarch, not a usurper who ruled by whim. But as winter's hush lay over the realm, a storm brewed inside House Florent. Quiet watchers placed on the Florent ravens eventually discovered coded messages addressed to an unknown party in Essos. Maester Harold, with some coaxing and help from an acolyte from the Citadel, managed to partially decipher them. What they uncovered suggested that Lord Alistair Florent was indeed reaching out to a Targaryen faction, hoping to ingratiate himself in the event of an invasion. It was borderline treason, though proof remained incomplete. Loras weighed how to respond. He summoned Alistair Florent to Highgarden under the pretense of hearing a land dispute. The older lord arrived, suspicious but unable to refuse. Loras greeted him politely, then had him brought to a secluded solar. Tarly and Rabar stood by, silent and stern, while Maester Harold held the incriminating documents. "Lord Florent," Loras began, voice resonating with authority, "I have reason to believe you have engaged in correspondence with a Targaryen claimant in Essos. I have partial transcripts of coded letters. Would you care to explain?" Alistair's face paled, then flushed with anger or fear. He glanced at Tarly's stony expression and Rabar's silent watchfulness. "Your Grace," he said, trying to steady himself, "I know nothing of these transcripts. If any of my lesser kin acted on their own, Loras cut him off sharply. "Do not play me for a fool. The day of the coronation you swore loyalty. These letters suggest a willingness to betray that oath should a Targaryen arrive with an army." Alistair's eyes darted. He seemed cornered. My king, we have no guarantee that Daenerys Targaryen won't arrive to claim all of Westeros. If she comes with dragons, do we simply stand and burn? My house was considering contingencies. That is not your privilege, Tarly interjected coldly. Your house is sworn to the King of the Reach. You do not get to consider contingencies that might lead to your rightful king's downfall. Alistair's mouth opened. No words came. Loras leaned forward, knuckles white. Had you approached me with concerns, had you told me your fears, we could have addressed them. But instead, you conspired in secret. The older man swallowed. I meant no harm to the Reach. I only sought to preserve my house. Enough, Loras said, cutting him off once more. I will not tolerate disloyalty in a time when unity is our shield. You are fortunate I do not have your head for treason. Instead, I will strip you of certain privileges. You will relinquish certain lands near Brightwater keep to the crown. Your family will remain under close watch. One more whisper of betrayal, and I will not be so merciful. Alistair trembled with indignation, but he could not defy Loras in this moment. Not with Tarly's men ready to arrest him. I submit to your judgment, your grace. Then begone, Loras said coldly. Return to your keep. Ensure your house commits no further treachery. Do not test me again. Florent bowed stiffly and exited, face burning with shame and resentment. Once he was gone, Tarly gave a grim smile. You handled that well. He will brood and scheme, but he knows now you are not weak. Loras nodded, though a pit opened in his stomach. He had just punished a lord for pursuing what might have been a rational fear of dragons. The line between justice and tyranny could be thin. Still, he concluded that letting Florent's disloyalty fester would invite more unrest. We must keep a close watch on him, Loras told Rabar. He will not forget this slight. Thus the season wore on. Snow fell and melted in the fields. The days grew short. Trade caravans still traversed the roads, though in fewer numbers. The small folk kept close to their hearths, while the highborn passed the colder months hosting each other at feasts or tourneys of lesser scale. Loras avoided grand tournaments, fearing they might offer too much opportunity for infiltration or conspiracies, though he did sponsor small justs and melees to keep morale up. One crisp morning, Loras decided to ride out with a small escort, wanting to inspect the watchtowers along the Mander and see firsthand how the border with the Westerlands fared. Tarly and Rabar advised caution, but Loras insisted on leading by example. They took 50 mounted men, well-armed and disciplined. The roads were half-frozen, white patches dusting the farmland. People in villages peeked out from shuttered windows, waving timidly at the king's retinue. Loras waved back, smiling under the leaden sky. They reached the first watchtower by midday, a sturdy wooden structure perched on a small hill. Guards saluted Loras as he approached, and he inquired about sightings or skirmishes. The men reported only minor movements from across the border. Small parties, likely the same scouts they'd seen before, but no major force. From the top of the tower, Loras surveyed the rolling terrain, seeing how winter had stripped the farmland of color. A certain emptiness lay across the fields, but it also gave vantage. Any large army would be spotted miles away against the pale ground. Satisfied, he and his escort continued onward. They spent the next few days touring more towers, conferring with local knights. Tarly accompanied him part of the way, then rode toward Horn Hill to handle personal matters. Rabar stayed at Loras's side. On the third night, they camped near the border, a bleak winter sky overhead. Loras found himself huddled in a cloak by the fire, remembering the simpler days when he was just a young knight jousting in summer tourneys. The starry sky provided quiet companionship, but the monarchy he'd forged allowed few illusions of returning to those carefree days. One of the outriders returned that evening with a prisoner in tow, an older man wearing battered armor and bearing scars. They had caught him skulking near the watchtower. Loras had the man brought before him by the campfire. "Who are you?" Loras asked, voice echoing in the hush of the night. "Why do you lurk near our watchtowers?" The man spat on the ground, eyes defiant. "Name's Garland Storm. Not that it matters. I'm no one's man, just trying to survive. Heard talk of a Targaryen landing soon. Thought I might find work if there's a fight in these parts. Loras exchanged a look with Rabar. So you're a Sellsword? A brigand? An opportunist, Garland Storm said with a harsh chuckle. I've no love for Lannisters or Tyrells, or Targaryens for that matter. But I hear the new king of the Reach is building watchtowers, might hire men. Or the Lannisters might hire men to tear them down. Either way, I get paid. Clever, Loras said, though he felt a stir of anger. But you would do better to keep out of the reach of my watchmen. If you're found scouting for the Lannisters, you'll be hanged. The man grimaced. Not scouting for them yet. If you pay better, I might scout for you. Rabar snorted in disgust. Your Grace, should we hang him for espionage? Loras regarded the man's worn face, seeing a reflection of how far the realm had fallen. Men drifting from cause to cause, driven by coin. He shook his head slowly. No, let him go, but do not let him linger in the Reach. If he's found again, it will be different. He turned to the Outriders. Escort him to the border. See that he crosses into the Westerlands and does not return. Garland Storm laughed bitterly. Fair enough, Your Grace. Next time we meet, might be on the field of battle. Pray it isn't, Loras replied coldly. For your sake. With that, the man was led away into the darkness. Loras stared into the fire, pondering how many like him roamed the land. Men with no loyalty, only a thirst for coin. Such individuals were the harbingers of chaos. The next day, Loras and his party wrapped up their inspection and returned to Highgarden. Snow fell more steadily now, though it seldom stuck for long. As they re-entered the familiar gates of Highgarden, Loras felt a weariness settle on him. So many threats, so many pieces in play. Lannisters, Targaryens, possible Stormland aggression, disgruntled lords at home. The crown weighed heavily indeed. Yet he was not alone. Tarly remained as vigilant as ever, and Rabar was an ever-reliable knight. Baelor Hightower might be reserved, but he consistently supported the realm's stability. Paxter Redwine's fleet guarded the seas, and, most unexpectedly, an accord with Dorne offered a buffer to the south. That evening, Loras stood upon a parapet of Highgarden's outer wall, gazing over the moonlit river. The Mander's surface shimmered with silver ripples, and the lights of small riverside villages blinked in the distance. A hush lay over the land, the hush of winter nights that lulled the fields into slumber, preserving them for the next season of growth. Somewhere beyond his sight, men plotted wars and crowns. Perhaps a Targaryen conjured the final details of an invasion, perhaps the Westerlands sharpened swords. But here, at least for a moment, the hush whispered of peace. He recalled how it all began. His own vow to spare the Reach from further ruin by forging a kingdom separate from the Iron Throne's endless quarrels. He had crowned himself king of the Reach to protect the farmland, the people, and the wealth that made these lands flourish. He would not kneel to any distant overlord. He would not feed thousands of his men into a grinder for another's ambition. In the beginning, it might have seemed like arrogance, but now, looking at what he had built, fragile alliances, watchtowers, trade agreements, a court that functioned if not perfectly then at least earnestly, he believed he had done right by his homeland. The memory of Marjorie's letter flickered through his mind. Perhaps, if the chaos lessened, she would find her way home. If there ever came a stable day in Westeros again, perhaps the siblings could walk the gardens together, free of fear. It was a tender hope, and he clung to it. He took a deep breath of the cold air. I am king of the Reach, he murmured to no one, reaffirming that truth in the stillness. The words carried no pride, only a sense of responsibility. I will not fail my people. The wind stirred his cloak, carrying the faint scent of winter roses. Somewhere inside the keep, a guard was humming a half-forgotten lullaby. In that moment, Loras felt both alone and at one with the land. He had chosen this path, and it would be neither short nor easy. But as the hush of the night cradled Highgarden, he found resolve blooming in his heart once more, like the promise of spring beneath the snow.